everyone. So today I'm going to talk about retransition. That is, people who have detransitioned who retransition back to being trans. I'm going to talk about how oftentimes those who retransition are used as like a, oh, see, told you so, by trans rights advocates and people who are promoting that kind of ideology. And I'm here to say that retransition is not the gotcha that they think it is. So, first of all, to understand why people retransition, you have to understand why people transition in the first place. Now, everybody's different, and everybody is going to believe they're trans and transition for different reasons. But if I'm to generalize here from my experience and all the many stories I've heard over the last 3 years, generally speaking, people transition because they feel uncomfortable in their bodies. That, or they hate their biological sex. They hate their sexual anatomy. They hate their genitalia. They hate being male or female. They're very uncomfortable with their place in the world as male or female. That's why people would do it. Now, the reasons behind the reason they feel that way can vary. So people feel uncomfortable in their bodies for whatever reason. They transition, believing that this is going to help them, believing this because this is what the medical establishment is telling them, this is what the therapeutic establishment is telling them, this is what society is telling them, this is what trans rights advocates are telling them, this is what the LGBTQ community at large is telling them. I want to make a distinction between the LGBTQ community and lesbian, gays, and bisexual, same-sex attracted people, okay? Because that's a whole, I won't go into all of that now, but this throwing together of a bunch of people into one group doesn't work. We're all here for different reasons, and the forced teaming has been very devastating to actual gays and lesbians and bisexual people. Anyways, so when I say LGBTQ community at large, I mean the big political aspect of the community, the advocacy part of the community, the political, the organizations, the big multi-million organizations, that LGBTQ, not the individual folks. So the LGBT community at large is also telling them that if you feel uncomfortable in your body, well, hell, you're trans and transition is going to make that all feel better. So people believe it, and they go down that road and they transition. And very often we end up realizing that transition didn't quite fix the issues we thought it was going to fix. And we become discouraged about it, and like, what the hell, I thought this was supposed to fix stuff, but it didn't really fix my gender dysphoria. It didn't really fix my being uncomfortable. I'm still uncomfortable. I'm hiding my body, and hiding my body makes me feel more comfortable in certain situations and in certain places, but generally speaking, I am still the sex I am. You're still this. You cannot change sex. Ultimately, you can use drugs and surgeries to disguise it, to change appearance, and to blend in with the opposite sex, but you cannot change sex. And so that is a reality that so many people who transition and detrans people just were not prepared for. So for whatever reason, they become discouraged about the transition, right? They decide to detransition. Now, there is an argument out there that says people only detransition because they get ridicule from their family, or it's hard to be trans in society, and they detransition because of bigotry and stuff like that. And while that is the case for some, I'm not going to say that doesn't happen, because I'm sure it does happen. It's not easy to try to live as the opposite sex when you're not. It's not easy to undergo surgeries. It's not easy to, sometimes lose family and things like that, or have family, it can complicate your life. So it is not easy. And you can be discriminated against. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. It does happen. However, the vast majority of people who have detransitioned that I know of, that I have spoken to, that I have seen, detransition because of transition regret. Okay? Those very, very bad words that nobody wants to talk about. Transition regret. So the people detransition. And they think that's going to fix it. They think that's the answer. Okay, this didn't work, so I'm going to detransition. Well, they detransition. They realize that very often their mental health issues are still there. It's maybe harder to live as the sex they are because of different procedures they've undergone. If you're a woman and you took testosterone, now you have facial hair. Now maybe you don't have breasts. Maybe we even had lower surgery, or bottom surgery, or sex reassignment surgery, genital surgery, whatever you want to call it. You had that surgery. That you can't reverse something like that. So now you're having to negotiate a world in this body, in this place. And very often that can be very daunting and challenging. And I have heard of some detransitioners who had extensive surgeries, especially the genital surgeries, that decide, I'm going to just go ahead and try to live as the opposite sex and try to just do that because I've already gone so far. And I get it. There is no going back from this. And I don't know what I would do if I had gotten phalloplasty or metodioplasty, which I had gone for 2 consultations to have. I'll talk about that later one time, about my consultations and why, that whole thing was very interesting. But, I stepped up to that plate. I was very close to having bottom surgery, genital reconstruction, SRS. And I didn't do it, and I'm so thankful I didn't. But had I done it, I don't know where I could be at this point. I don't know how I would feel about this stuff. So that's one reason that people can just decide to retransition. They've gone so far, it's just easier to do it that way. And I honestly can't blame them. I can't. You got to do what you got to do. The other thing, and the thing that I've noticed most of all, is that the underlying mental health condition, the underlying trauma, the underlying issues have not been dealt with. Okay? They were not dealt with when they transition. They were not dealt with when they detransition. Those issues remain. Transition was a coping mechanism. Okay? Like any other maladaptive coping mechanism, such as, drug use, or, alcoholism, or various addictions, or maybe you're self-destructive, or whatever, we all have maladaptive coping mechanisms, that it's best to try to learn to not use those maladaptive coping mechanisms. They don't really help. They make life harder. So transition was a coping mechanism, not a healthy one. And they didn't deal with their issues after detransitioning. They thought, oh, well, this didn't work, I'm going to detransition, and it's going to be fine. Well, the issues are still there, and they don't address them, and they don't know how to deal with them, so they end up retransitioning. So they retransition, thinking that, maybe transition was the answer, and they're going to go back to that. And oftentimes I have seen people who I got to know as detransitioners bounce back and forth several times. I know one woman who has bounced back 4 or 5 times, back and forth and back and forth. She just doesn't know where to land. And ultimately that's because she's not getting the help she needs. And that's a huge issue. That I think this goes back to the core of the whole problem of transition medicine. Is that you're not addressing the underlying issues. And when you don't address the underlying issues, you're not going to have a person who is going to be able to cope and make good, sound decisions. So, retransitioning, yeah, happens. It's not a surprise that it happens. I'm not surprised. I'm not shocked. And I sometimes, I sometimes see women come out as detrans, with the burning fire of 1,000 suns, and I kind of suspect they're going to retransition because they haven't addressed their issues and they haven't admitted to themselves why they did it, really. And they're just trying to jump from one answer to another, one quick fix to another, instead of the hard, brutal work it's going to take to actually overcome these kind of things. So yeah, that's why people retransition. It's not the gotcha you think it is, okay?